Being sensitive in today's world can often feel like carrying an invisible weight on your shoulders. Every glance, every word, every slight change in tone from someone else can echo louder in your heart than anyone would ever guess. It's not that you want to feel too much, it's just how you're wired. You notice things others miss. You care deeply, you think profoundly. And while this sensitivity allows you to experience life with rare richness and empathy, it can also feel like a double-edged sword, one that brings both profound understanding and unexpected suffering. The sound of laughter in another room can make you wonder if it's about you. A delayed text reply can spiral into thoughts of rejection. A piece of criticism, even kindly given, can echo in your mind for days. But what if this very sensitivity, this gift that sometimes feels like a burden, could become your greatest strength? What if instead of trying to fix it, we learned how to understand it, to live with it, to guide it instead of letting it guide us? That's where the ancient teachings of Buddhism shine like a lantern in the dark. These teachings don't ask you to be someone you're not. They don't demand that you numb your heart or become impervious to pain. Instead, they gently ask you to observe, to listen, to accept. They guide you into a deeper connection with yourself, one where sensitivity is not your enemy, but a quiet friend teaching you the rhythms of your soul. The first lesson is simple, yet powerful. To know and accept that being sensitive is part of your nature. You were born this way, and that's not a mistake. In the wisdom of Zen awakening, we begin not by pushing away what we are, but by welcoming it. This isn't weakness. This is your blueprint, and recognizing that is the first step on your journey toward true emotional resilience. When you stop fighting your own nature, a kind of peace enters, a softness, a truth. You are sensitive, and that is okay. In fact, it's more than okay, it's beautiful. The Buddha taught that self-awareness is the foundation of transformation. So instead of judging yourself for feeling deeply, start seeing this as a key that unlocks doors most people never notice. Doors into compassion, into wisdom, into presence. Your sensitivity isn't a cage, it's a window through which the light of understanding can shine. And yet, to walk this path, you must also learn that sensitivity isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning, a beginning that calls for growth. When you understand that your sensitivity is not a flaw but a trait, something you were born with, you begin to loosen the grip of self-judgment. No longer burdened by the thought that you're too much or too emotional, you create space for something more profound: self-compassion. This is not a soft, fleeting feeling. This is strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind that whispers gently to your heart, "You're enough." And with that acceptance comes connection. Because when you begin to accept your own nature, something incredible happens. You begin to recognize others who carry the same depth. You start to see that you're not alone, that there's a quiet tribe out there, people who felt the sting of a careless word, who've cried at the sight of a sunset, who stayed up at night turning over conversations in their minds. And in this shared understanding, there is healing. Buddhism doesn't promise to take away your sensitivity. It doesn't promise to turn you into someone who lets every insult slide off like rain on glass. Instead, it offers something far more powerful, a way to live in harmony with yourself. That harmony begins when you stop resisting what is. You stop telling yourself that you shouldn't feel this way. You stop comparing your reactions to those of people who seem more tough. In the teachings of Zen awakening, we learn that authenticity isn't found by mimicking others. It's found by embracing the truth of your own experience. When you let go of the belief that you have to change in order to be okay, you begin to glow from the inside. You begin to attract the people and experiences that see you, not as too much, but as just right. This is what it means to live in accordance with your Dharma, your true nature. It's not a lofty spiritual concept. It's the everyday courage of saying, "This is who I am, and I will meet the world with openness, not shame." Sensitivity then becomes your guide. It shows you what matters to you. It deepens your relationships. It brings color and texture to your world. But to fully live this truth, to stand tall in your sensitivity, you must also learn the next essential skill: emotional control. Not control in the harsh, rigid sense, but control as awareness, as mindfulness. The kind of control that doesn't stuff feelings down or pretend they don't exist. Instead, it watches them. It breathes through them. It chooses not to react, but to respond. Through mindfulness, a central pillar of Buddhist teaching, you begin to understand your feelings, rather than be ruled by them. Imagine your emotions as waves on the ocean. Without mindfulness, you're just floating in a boat, tossed around. But with mindfulness, you have an anchor, you have a sail, you have direction. And this changes everything. Now, instead of feeling overwhelmed when emotions rise, you meet them like old friends. You watch them come, you watch them go. And in doing so, you begin to realize something liberating. You are not your feelings. You are the sky in which those feelings pass. This realization is not just an idea. It's a daily practice, a discipline, a return to presence. Buddhism doesn't promise a life without pain or emotion, but it offers tools. Tools that help you hold your heart without dropping it. Tools that turn your emotional sensitivity into emotional intelligence, into power, into peace. So, as you begin this journey with Zen awakening, remember, you are not broken, you are not too much, you are not alone. You are simply someone who feels the world more vividly than most. And with the right teachings, that vividness becomes vision, that depth becomes stability, that sensitivity becomes a source of connection rather than isolation. Let your sensitivity be the lantern, not the shadow. And let the ancient wisdom that has guided millions before you now guide you too, gently toward a life of awareness, calm, and compassionate strength. There was a time when May felt like she was walking through life with her heart exposed, every word and glance from others slicing into her with alarming sharpness. She didn't understand why she was the only one crying at commercials, overthinking casual conversations, or feeling gutted after hearing even the mildest criticism. Growing up, people told her she was too emotional, too soft, or that she needed to toughen up. And so, May carried a quiet shame about her sensitivity, thinking it was a flaw that needed fixing. But something shifted when she discovered the teachings of Buddhism. It wasn't an instant transformation, but a slow, tender unfolding. Like petals of a lotus rising from the muddy water, she began to see that her sensitivity wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was part of her unique design. The first lesson Buddhism offered her was radical. Don't resist your sensitivity. Understand it, accept it. In that simple, gentle invitation, May found the doorway to peace she had long been seeking. She stopped waging war against her emotions and instead began watching them like a quiet observer, letting them rise and fall like waves without judgment. She began to see that sensitivity didn't make her weak. It made her perceptive, compassionate, deeply human. It allowed her to see subtle shifts in people's energies, to notice small details in moments that others often overlooked. Her ability to feel deeply wasn't a burden, it was a gift. As she practiced sitting in silence, breathing in, breathing out, just being present, May slowly untangled the knots of her inner critic. That voice that used to shout, "You're too much," began to quiet, softened by the awareness that she wasn't broken, she was beautifully attuned. The shame began to lift. She didn't have to be numb to be strong. She could feel fully and still remain grounded. Each morning she sat on her cushion, the world still dark outside. The only sound the gentle whisper of her breath moving in and out. She didn't sit to escape her emotions anymore. She sat to meet them, to greet them as friends. Joy, sadness, hurt, gratitude, fear, love, they all came and went, and she no longer chased or ran from any of them. The practice of mindfulness showed her that emotions were not fixed, not absolute. They were clouds passing through the sky of her awareness. She could feel without drowning. She could hurt without unraveling. One day, someone criticized her work at her new job. It would have shattered her before. But now, something had changed. She noticed her heart race, her stomach tighten, but she took a breath and observed. "This is just a moment," she whispered inwardly. "This doesn't define me." Instead of collapsing into self-doubt, she asked a thoughtful question. She responded with grace. That night she journaled, not to vent, but to understand. "Why did that comment sting?" she wrote. What wound did it press against? Slowly, she unearthed a memory from her childhood, a moment when she felt she had disappointed her father. The old wound had opened, not because of the words, but because of what they echoed. With compassion, she wrote to her younger self, "You did your best. You were always enough." And in writing, she healed. As May continued down this path, she discovered that life would never stop presenting difficult situations. But she had learned to meet them with stillness instead of storm. When she got rejected from a relationship she hoped would work, she didn't spiral into despair. Instead, she walked through the park, felt the breeze on her skin, and allowed her tears to fall without shame. The wind, the earth, the trees, they held her like old friends. Nature reminded her that seasons pass, and so do sorrows. She wasn't trapped in her feelings anymore. She was flowing with them. Each morning, her journal became a sacred ritual. Some days it held rage, some days grief, some days love. But all of it was welcome. And through this, she saw herself more clearly than she ever had before. Her patterns, her triggers, the soft places that still needed tending. Buddhism hadn't turned her into a rock. It had helped her become like water. Fluid, adaptable, strong in a different way. She didn't have to stop being sensitive to be okay. She had to learn to hold that sensitivity with wisdom. There were still moments when people's words cut deep, but now she paused before reacting. Is this about me or about them? She would ask herself. She remembered the Buddhist principle. What others say is more a reflection of their inner state than your worth. With that understanding, she stopped taking everything so personally. Someone's anger didn't have to be her fault. Someone's silence didn't have to mean rejection. She could observe, breathe, and choose a wise response. And that choice, choosing not to take the pain of others as her own, was freedom. She found that she didn't have to explain herself constantly anymore. She didn't have to over-apologize for having emotions. Her boundaries grew stronger, her peace deeper. She no longer needed everyone to like her. She just needed to live in alignment with her truth. Buddhism had taught her to let go, not of her heart, but of her attachment to what others thought of it. The serenity that came with that realization was immense. There was a day when May found herself laughing, fully, freely, at a moment that would have once embarrassed her. She had tripped and spilled tea in front of a group of coworkers. Instead of shrinking with shame, she chuckled and shrugged. Guess the floor was thirsty too, she joked, and everyone laughed with her. That simple moment marked a shift, not because it was extraordinary, but because she didn't crumble. She had changed. Her softness remained, but it was no longer fragile. It had become supple, resilient. The sensitivity was still there, but now it was wrapped in strength. And that strength came not from fighting her emotions, but from befriending them. As the weeks passed, her journal filled with insights. I am not weak for feeling. I am strong for facing what I feel. Not every emotion needs a reaction, some just need space. Kindness to myself is not indulgence, it is necessity. These became her mantras. These became her truth. Through the lens of Buddhism, she had not only survived her sensitivity, she had transformed through it. She began to teach others, not in formal classes, but through her way of being. Friends noticed how she listened deeply, how she responded with calm, how she held space without trying to fix. Her peace was contagious, her presence, a refuge. She was no longer running from herself, she had come home. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves fluttered down like whispered reminders of impermanence, May sat alone by the lake. The sun was melting into the horizon, setting the sky ablaze in pink and orange hues, and her reflection shimmered faintly on the water's surface. She wasn't here to escape anything. She wasn't trying to solve a problem or fix her feelings. She was simply present, utterly and completely. This, she realized, was the fruit of her inner work. There was a deep stillness inside her, one she could access even in the midst of chaos. A stillness she had once believed she would never know. Her sensitivity hadn't disappeared. In fact, she still cried easily, still felt the sting of harsh words, still carried a tender heart that bruised when the world was too loud. But she no longer resented that about herself. In that softness, she had found power. In that power, she had discovered purpose. She remembered something she had once read in a book of Buddhist teachings. A lotus does not grow in clean water, but in the thickest mud. And it was true. Her pain, her past struggles with self-judgment, all of it had fertilized her growth. Without it, she wouldn't have bloomed. Now when she saw someone hurting, she didn't rush to offer advice or try to fix them. She simply sat with them, offered her quiet presence, her open heart. She had learned that healing often comes not from being told what to do, but from being deeply seen and held without judgment. Her friends began to open up to her in ways they never had before. They trusted her, not because she had all the answers, but because she didn't pretend to. She didn't shy away from pain. She could sit in the fire of discomfort and remain centered. That made her a rare kind of safe space. One day, a close friend broke down in her kitchen, overwhelmed by the weight of a collapsing marriage. May didn't try to soothe her with empty reassurances. She sat beside her, placed a gentle hand on her back and said softly, "I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." That was all it took. The tears flowed freely. And in that moment, healing began, not because anything was solved, but because everything was allowed. May had become the kind of person she once wished she could find during her darkest hours. And yet, she still had days when the world felt like too much. Crowded subways, blaring news cycles, tense family dinners. There were times when her nerves frayed and her patience wore thin. But now she approached those moments with awareness. She would step outside, find a quiet corner, and breathe. She would put her hand on her chest and say, "This moment is hard, but I am still okay." These rituals, once foreign, had become her anchors. She no longer feared being overwhelmed because she trusted herself to return to center. It was never about becoming invincible. It was about becoming intimate with her own inner life. She had learned to ride the waves rather than fight them. There was a gentleness in the way she moved now, a softness in her voice that came not from insecurity, but from knowing. Knowing that the world didn't need more noise, more bravado, more pretending. It needed authenticity, presence. It needed people who were unafraid to feel and still stand tall. And that's who she was becoming, day by day. Her mornings started with incense and silence. Her evenings ended with gratitude and reflection. Not because she was trying to be spiritual, but because it brought her peace. When people asked how she managed to stay so grounded, she would smile and say, "I listen, to myself, to the world, and I don't run away from what I hear." There came a time when May was offered a promotion at work. A big one, more responsibility, more visibility, more pressure. A younger version of her would have hesitated, questioned if she was ready, if she could handle the scrutiny. But now, she paused, not out of fear, but discernment. She sat with the offer in silence for a full day. She asked herself, "Does this serve my peace? Will it allow me to remain in alignment with my values?" And only after hearing a full-bodied yes from within did she accept. Her decision wasn't based on ambition or approval. It was rooted in clarity. That clarity was something she had cultivated through years of listening, feeling, reflecting. Her career began to flourish, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because she brought her whole self to every task. Her sensitivity, once a liability in the corporate world, became her superpower. She could read the room, sense unspoken tensions, diffuse conflicts before they exploded. People noticed. They respected her. Not because she was the loudest voice in the room, but because she was often the calmest. But even with all her growth, there were nights when old memories still surfaced. The face of someone who once hurt her. A betrayal she hadn't fully understood. A wound that still ached. She didn't push these away. Instead, she invited them in like old visitors, sat with them in silence and asked, "What are you here to teach me?" Sometimes the answers came in whispers, other times in tears, but always she found herself a little lighter afterward. The past no longer held her hostage. It had become part of her sacred tapestry. One evening, while walking through a quiet forest trail just before dusk, May came across a fallen tree. It had once stood tall, its trunk wide and sturdy, but now it lay sprawled across the path, its branches broken. And yet from the base of the tree, she saw new shoots growing, vibrant green against the dying wood. It struck her then, even when something falls, something else begins. This was the way of life. This was the wisdom she had come to embody. Not everything needed to last. Not everything needed to be fixed. Sometimes, things needed to fall apart so something new could grow. She whispered, "Thank you," to the fallen tree, not because it had given her an answer, but because it had reminded her of a truth she now carried in her bones. Healing is not about erasing pain. It's about growing in its presence. And so May kept walking, through forests and city streets, through days of joy and nights of sorrow, but always with the quiet flame of awareness lighting her path. She no longer chased peace, she had become it. There was a time when May believed that becoming strong meant becoming hardened, that to protect her energy she had to wall herself off from the world. She'd once thought boundaries were like barricades, fortresses built to keep pain out. But over time, as she walked the path of awareness and healing, she came to realize that boundaries weren't walls. They were doors. Doors she had the right to open or close based on her inner wisdom, not based on fear. That shift in perspective changed everything. It wasn't about shutting others out. It was about honoring her space, her time, and her emotional landscape. She started noticing the subtle ways her energy would shift around certain people, the small knots in her stomach when she ignored her own needs, the quiet discomfort when she agreed to things that drained her. These weren't just passing sensations, they were messages, and she finally began to listen. At first, saying no was difficult. There were tremors of guilt, the urge to explain herself, to justify her refusal. But slowly she practiced saying no with love. "I can't make it this time, but I hope it's wonderful. That doesn't feel right for me right now. I need a little space." Each time she spoke her truth gently but firmly, something inside her grew stronger, a sense of alignment, a quiet trust in herself. The more she honored her energy, the more others began to respect it. She didn't need to defend her boundaries. They spoke for themselves. And ironically, the more she protected her space, the more generous she became with her presence. Because now, when she showed up, she was whole. No resentment, no hidden exhaustion. Just her, fully there. Her home became a sanctuary, a space that mirrored her inner calm. Soft lighting, incense in the corners, cushions on the floor. No longer a place to collapse after burnout, it was now a place to return to herself. She created rituals, not out of rigidity, but reverence. Morning tea sipped slowly on the balcony, evening journaling under the warm hue of a salt lamp, moments of stillness between tasks. These weren't grand gestures, but they held power. They reminded her that peace isn't found in the absence of chaos, but in the spaces we create within it. Friends who entered her home often commented on the serenity in the air. "It just feels good here," they'd say. She would smile, knowing it wasn't just the decor, it was the energy. An energy she had cultivated with care. And her relationships began to shift too. Some drifted away, not out of conflict, but because they no longer aligned. There was sadness in those goodbyes, yes, but also grace. She no longer clung. She had learned that releasing someone with love was far more powerful than holding on out of habit or fear. And then, unexpectedly, new connections began to form. People who resonated with her truth, conversations that felt nourishing instead of draining, friendships rooted not in obligation, but in mutual respect and authenticity. These were the relationships she had once dreamed of, but never believed she deserved. Now they blossomed effortlessly, like wildflowers after a gentle rain. One afternoon, she met an elderly woman at a local meditation retreat. Her name was Asha, and her presence radiated something May couldn't quite describe, like a still lake that reflected the sky perfectly. They spoke briefly at first, exchanging simple pleasantries, but something drew May in. Over the next few days, they began to talk during the breaks, sharing tea and stories. Asha spoke with the kind of wisdom that comes not from books, but from life fully lived. She told May, "We don't protect our energy by hiding it away. We protect it by honoring it, by knowing when to give, when to rest, and when to simply be. Those words sank into May like seeds. She wrote them down in her journal that night and returned to them often. Asha became a quiet mentor, not in any official sense, but through presence alone. She reminded May of who she was becoming and who she had always been beneath the noise. As seasons passed, May found herself facing new challenges. Not everything was smooth. There were moments when her boundaries were tested, when old patterns resurfaced like ghosts in the fog, times when she questioned if she was strong enough, wise enough, grounded enough. But instead of spiraling, she paused. She sat. She breathed. She remembered. The growth she had cultivated wasn't linear. It spiraled, like the rings of a tree. And every return to an old lesson was an invitation to go deeper, not a sign of failure. One winter evening, during a particularly stressful time at work, May found herself slipping into over-responsibility. She stayed late, skipped meals, silenced her needs in the name of doing her part. The familiar ache of burnout began to creep in, but this time, something was different. She caught herself. She sat on the edge of her bed, eyes closed, and asked softly, "What am I forgetting?" The answer came like a whisper from within. "You are not a machine. You are a soul in a body. Rest." She called in sick the next day, not because she was physically ill, but because her soul needed tending. She spent the day wrapped in a blanket, sipping broth, reading poetry. And when she returned to work, she was clearer, calmer, more centered. These were the kinds of choices that built the life she now lived. Quiet, intentional, rooted in truth. She no longer needed dramatic transformations. She wasn't chasing enlightenment or perfection. She was practicing presence, tending to her inner garden, trusting that each small act of self-honor rippled outward in ways she might never fully see. She had stopped trying to control how others saw her, and instead focused on how she saw herself. That shift brought an unexpected lightness. Her laughter came more freely now, her movements less guarded. There was joy in the ordinary, in hanging laundry, chopping vegetables, walking barefoot on grass, joy that didn't require an audience or applause, just awareness. And perhaps most beautifully, she had learned to forgive, not just others, but herself, for the years she spent lost, for the mistakes she made in survival, for the times she betrayed her own needs in the name of acceptance. That forgiveness wasn't a one-time act. It was a practice, a softening. Each time an old regret surfaced, she would place her hand on her heart and whisper, "You did the best you could, and now you're doing better." It wasn't about erasing the past, but integrating it, turning wounds into wisdom, shame into compassion. That alchemy, quiet and slow, became her greatest magic. May no longer feared being misunderstood. She no longer rushed to explain herself to those unwilling to listen. She knew her energy was sacred, her presence was enough. And that knowing gave her freedom. The freedom to walk her path without apology. The freedom to love deeply without losing herself. The freedom to rest when needed and rise when called. She had become a woman of stillness and fire, gentle, yet fiercely loyal to her peace. And that, she knew, was her gift to the world. The seasons rolled gently over the hills of May's life, and with each cycle, she found new meanings hidden within familiar moments. One spring morning, she walked through the quiet temple gardens, where plum blossoms had just begun to bloom. The soft breeze carried the fragrance of renewal, and with every step, she felt herself release something that no longer served her. It had taken years, but she finally understood that protecting her energy didn't mean resisting the world. It meant flowing with it, choosing wisely where to anchor her attention and how to respond when the world pressed in. She watched the monks tending the garden in silence, moving with a rhythm that was neither hurried nor slow, just present. And she thought, this is how I want to move through life. Not reacting, not retreating, just responding from a place of grounded grace. She began to live her days like the temple garden, carefully pruned but still wild where it mattered. Her mornings were no longer a race against the clock, but a ritual of awakening. She would stretch beside the open window, feeling the breath of the day touch her skin. Tea steamed in her cup as she journaled in ink the color of river stones. She no longer scrolled through her phone before sunrise. Instead, she listened to the birds, the breeze, the silence inside her. That space, sacred and undisturbed, became her foundation. And on days when chaos threatened to intrude, she returned to it like a home within herself. Not everything around her changed, of course. The world still moved fast. People still carried their own pain and projections. But May had become like a tree with deep roots. Storms came and she swayed, but she no longer fell. Her energy was no longer something others could easily drain because she had learned to guard it without guilt. If someone brought negativity into her space, she didn't absorb it out of politeness. She met it with kindness, but stood firm. If someone demanded too much, she didn't shrink or stretch beyond her limits. She responded with calm clarity, holding her boundary like a candle in the dark. One day, an old friend resurfaced in her life, someone who had once taken more than they gave, someone who never quite saw her. They spoke over tea, and at first, the conversation felt nostalgic. But soon the old patterns emerged, subtle criticisms, masked as concern, requests that came wrapped in guilt. May felt the familiar tug inside her, the old impulse to appease. But then she paused, she breathed, she remembered. With a soft smile she said, "I care about you, but I'm not available for that." There was silence, a flicker of surprise on the other's face. But then, something beautiful happened. Instead of backlash, there was respect. Perhaps it was her tone, or perhaps it was her unwavering presence. Either way, she didn't leave the interaction depleted. She left whole. That was new. May had come to understand that people often mirrored our boundaries. When we respected ourselves, others followed suit. And those who didn't, well, they often faded away on their own. No drama, just distance. And that was okay. Not everyone is meant to walk the entire path with us. Some only stay for a chapter. She had learned to let go with grace, trusting that space made room for deeper alignment. And that trust spilled over into every part of her life. She no longer forced connections. She allowed them to bloom naturally, like flowers in spring. Not rushed, not controlled, just nurtured by presence and care. In the quiet corners of her home, she began creating what she called energy altars. Not religious shrines, but sacred spaces that reminded her of her essence. One corner held river stones from her travels, another a small bowl of lavender, another a feather found during a morning wall. These tokens weren't magical in themselves, but the intention behind them was. They were anchors, reminders, symbols of what she had reclaimed. Her peace, her sovereignty, her stillness. Sometimes, when she felt overwhelmed, she would sit beside one of these spaces, light a candle, and simply breathe. And the act of returning to that small space, to herself, was more healing than anything outside could offer. She also became mindful of the energy she consumed, not just from people, but from media, food, and even thoughts. She stopped watching the news late at night. She unfollowed accounts that fed fear or comparison. She chose books that uplifted rather than drained, conversations that deepened rather than scattered. She ate in silence sometimes, just to taste the food fully. She noticed how certain thoughts made her body tighten, and others helped her breathe easier. So she practiced choosing again and again, not from perfection, but from awareness. Each choice was a thread, and over time those threads wove a tapestry of calm. As the years passed, she stopped measuring her growth in visible milestones. She no longer needed external achievements to validate her path. Her success was in the invisible shifts, how she spoke to herself on hard days, how quickly she returned to center after being knocked off balance, how gently she treated others, even when they weren't gentle back. These quiet victories, unseen by the world, became her treasures. She had stopped chasing a destination and started honoring the journey. And in doing so, she discovered a kind of joy that didn't depend on circumstances, a joy rooted in simply being. One autumn evening, as golden leaves danced in the wind, May sat by the riverbank near her home. The sky had turned a soft shade of violet, and the water reflected it like a mirror. She watched as a single leaf floated downstream, carried effortlessly by the current, and in that moment she felt it again, that deep, spacious calm, that knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not because life was perfect, but because she was aligned with herself. She whispered a simple prayer into the fading light. May I continue to choose peace, even when it's hard. May I protect my energy, not out of fear, but out of love. And as the stars began to appear, one by one, she smiled. Not because everything was solved, but because she had found the strength to keep tending her light, even in the dark. That, she realized, was true. Protection, not hiding, not fighting, but staying centered in who she really was, no matter the noise, no matter the world. In the quiet stillness of winter, when the world around her seemed to pause, Mai experienced a new kind of solitude, not the lonely kind, but the sacred kind. Snow covered the garden in a soft white hush, and the bare trees stood like sentinels of patience and grace. Life had slowed to a whisper, and Mai too had followed its lead. She spent her days wrapped in warm layers, sipping herbal tea, listening to the creak of the wood floor beneath her feet. There was no rush, no urgency, only space to breathe and reflect. And in that space, she saw more clearly than ever how far she had come. Not just in what she had built, but in what she had released. She remembered how she used to feel guilty for resting, as if stillness had to be earned. But now she welcomed rest like an honored guest. She understood that renewal wasn't a luxury, it was necessary. Just like the earth slept before spring returned, she too needed seasons of pause to bloom again. There was wisdom in the waiting, power in the quiet. She didn't need to be productive every second. Her worth wasn't measured by output, it was measured by presence, by how deeply she could live each moment without needing to escape it. And so she began treating her energy like a precious gift, not a limitless currency to be spent on everyone who asked. She became selective, not in a harsh or superior way, but in a sacred, discerning way. Not everyone deserved access to her deepest parts. Not every opportunity was aligned with her soul. She began saying no more often, not to be difficult, but to stay true. Each no created space for the right yes. And in that space, she found peace. She no longer apologized for needing quiet, for choosing solitude, for protecting her light. She saw now that the most beautiful things in her life had come from that space: clarity, insight, stillness. Friends began to notice something different in her. They couldn't always name it, but they felt it. She radiated calm, even when things were uncertain. She listened without trying to fix. She spoke with softness, but her words carried weight. When others panicked, she remained grounded. Not because she didn't feel things deeply, she did. But because she had learned not to live at the mercy of emotion. She could hold it, honor it, and still return to center. And slowly, the people around her began shifting too. Her presence gave them permission to slow down, to speak more honestly, to feel safe. Without preaching, without pushing, just by being who she was, she became a mirror for what was possible. There was one moment that sealed this transformation. One rainy evening, a young woman came to the temple, eyes swollen from crying, voice trembling as she asked for shelter. Mi welcomed her without question, offering warm soup and silence. The girl reminded her of herself years ago, lost and overwhelmed, unsure how to hold all the pain. That night, as they sat by the fire, the girl said through tears, "I don't know how to feel better. I give everything to everyone and I have nothing left." May didn't offer advice. She simply placed her hand over the girl's and whispered, "You don't need to be everything for everyone. It's okay to choose yourself. It's okay to rest. You're allowed to be full before you pour." The girl wept harder, not from sadness, but from the relief of being seen. And in that moment, May knew why her journey had mattered, not for the accolades, not for the peace she had found, but because it allowed her to be a light for someone else. A quiet reminder that healing was possible, that boundaries were a form of love, that protecting your energy wasn't selfish, it was sacred. In the years that followed, May became a guide for many, not a guru, not a teacher in the formal sense, but a quiet anchor. People came not for answers, but to witness her way of living, the simplicity of it, the integrity, the ease. And when they left, they often carried a piece of that energy with them, like a candle lit from hers. And this, she realized, was the true purpose of protecting her energy, not to isolate, but to illuminate, not to withdraw, but to hold space. She didn't need to convince anyone of her truth. She only needed to embody it. Eventually, as all stories do, hers began to quiet. Her days became even slower, her walks more tender. But her spirit remained strong. She had become like the ancient stones in the temple path, weathered, grounded, silently powerful. One final morning, as the sun filtered through the shoji screens, May sat by the window, tea in hand, watching the first plum blossoms of the year. A smile played on her lips, not because life had been easy, but because she had lived it deeply. She had chosen wisely. She had protected what mattered, and in doing so, she had become something eternal. Her story is not unique. It lives in all of us, the quiet call to come home to ourselves, to shed the layers that no longer fit, to protect the energy that fuels our light. May's journey is a reminder that we don't have to give ourselves away to belong. We don't have to burn out to prove our worth. Peace is not found in doing more, it's found in doing what aligns. In choosing, again and again, to honor the sacred within. That choice is always ours, and it's never too late to begin.